All right, it is 3:30. You guys are sticking with us through the afternoon of day two, and so we want to keep things right on time as we can. Thank you so much for all of you for joining us for another session this afternoon. We're very pleased to have Bob Swaney here with us to talk about fundraising in these very unprecedented times and very unprecedented. I think that's a contradiction in terms. I don't think that works that way, but hey, what the heck. Please keep your mics on mute until Q&A. You can turn on your cameras if you want to let us see you, but you certainly don't have to. We'll be watching the chat if you run into any difficulties or have any questions along the way. And have fun. I'm going to hand it off to Bob. Bob?
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. So we're going to talk about, because I like to use the term crisis a lot when ensconced around fundraising, but we're going to talk about it today because you're dealing with it all the time. And before we get started again, Sarah, thank you. And thank you to the IAC for asking me to do this. I'm happy to be involved. For those of you who don't know me, I'm based here just outside of Indianapolis, and I see some of the names on the screen. See some familiar friends and hope to meet some new ones, although it's a little tougher virtually, I understand. But again, today we're going to talk about fundraising in times of crisis. I've got about 40 minutes of information to present. We'll have more than enough time at the end for Q&A, and we'll kind of come back around. And so if you have questions, you can go ahead and put them. If we have time, we'll answer them in real time. If not, we'll come back at the end. But just, again, thanks for joining us today. For those of you who don't know my background, I spent 20 years with symphony orchestras in Indianapolis, Chicago, and St. Louis. My first one was actually in Evansville, Indiana. So since we're here locally, that'll mean a lot to some of you. And so I did that for the first 20 years. And since 2006, had this firm, RSC. We do fundraising consulting and executive search. And we're focused on arts and cultural organizations almost exclusively. So you can see some of the places we've worked with here. That's a small sampling, but we really, really enjoy it. We really find that that's our sweet spot, and everyone who works with us has an affinity and really deep love for the arts. So today's webinar, what we're going to talk about in terms of the crisis fundraising is we'll take an overview of some of our best practices, things that we're recommending to our clients. I can promise you this won't be a commercial for my firm, but I'll talk about our clients some because it'll bring some clarity and some real life examples to some of the things that we're doing. So we'll talk about some of our best practices. We'll talk about the normal sort of donor cycle that you're likely very familiar with, and we'll talk about then strengthening relationships over the next 18 to 24 months. And then we'll look at fundraising options over the next year, and then we'll have that Q&A I promised. So I'll jump right into it then. What we consider some of our best practices, because right now, with everything that's going on, it is so easy to get distracted. And it is so easy to get distracted by things that you really can't control, and things that'll be distracting on time and efficiency. So one of the things that we say over and over and over again is focus on the things that you can control and the things that you can influence, and forget everything else, which I know is hard, but as a daily discipline, this idea of working in the areas that you can actually have an impact, or we can influence impact, it has become an efficiency discipline that many of our clients are using. And we find that it keeps them focused in terms of fundraising in a really good, strong area, and in the right ways, not ways of making up new ideas to fundraise that are inconceivably hard to accomplish. Number two, keep your patrons. The patron preservation is key to organizational recovery and stability, and eventually growth again. But we'll talk more about the patron preservation as well as we get a little deeper into this. But keeping patrons is paramount right now. The third one is creating value, producing and promoting your art. We had questions early on, and we still get them some today, about how much should we be producing, and if we can't do it in our normal rate of excellence, should we still doing it? If we don't have access to artists, should we still keep doing it? The answer is yes, do it within the boundaries that you can do it, and do it well. So engaging your artists and your board. Organizations have resources right now. They still have resources by and large in their board, in their artists, and sometimes in other levels of volunteer or community engagement, folks who they have partnerships with. So continue to engage the people who you can engage while you're doing whatever production you're doing in terms of art right now. The next one, of course, keep asking and keep stewarding. I'm surprised even now on almost a weekly basis, I still get the question, should we be asking people for money? And as somebody who was in fundraising for a long time and now coaches it, I mean, that of course, the answer is, of course you should. So we're going to talk a little bit about that process and system today. And fundraising continues no matter what. And even in what I call a low performance mode or a low open mode in terms of museums and other organizations, even in a low activity mode, yes, absolutely continue to fundraise. So 6 action steps that I hope that most of you are taking. Continuing to put out some positive news. So producing live and online content, that produces good news. Constantly promoting your organization, even if you don't have as much to talk about as you once did, still keep regularly promoting it. We're going to talk about the plan that goes into that as well today. Number 3, doubling down on stewardship, making sure that you're investing in the people and the institutions who invest in you. So again, it's a very simplistic kind of idea, but it's also something that gets pushed to the side very quickly because of all the other priorities, and because you may not be in the office, and because you may not see your team, and because you don't see your donors in the same way that you did. So doubling down on personalized stewardship, while it sounds simple, actually takes a high degree of organizational self-discipline. Number 4, well, this will be a theme, ask for support, keep doing that. Number 5, utilizing your resources. That's in terms of both, in terms of all money, time, human resources, whatever your resources are that you have, and being able to fluctuate when those change. Sometimes you have more resources and sometimes you have less, and being able to adapt to that very, very quickly. The last one, of course, is consider engaging a guide. Again, not necessarily a promotion to say, everybody go out and hire a fundraising company and please hire mine. It's not that. It's the idea that while you could hire a fundraising firm or a single consultant, you could also perhaps have a volunteer who has the kind of background in fundraising that would be beneficial. Maybe they're retired, maybe they're not. Maybe the organization where they work is also sort of in low activity mode and can help. But the point is, get someone who can help you make fewer mistakes in fundraising, who can give you good boundaries, who can help you keep momentum moving forward. And that's why, with all the other things that organizations have to deal with right now, having some level of coach, whoever that is and whatever it is, we actively promote. So I can't give you 6 actions to take unless I give you 6 actions not to take. The first one is don't do plea, and this is a never. We almost never ever suggest that people do needs-based fundraising in their arts organization, and particularly now. And the question comes up of why? Well, because everybody needs the money. Everybody needs the money. Even for-profits need the money, and so to be a voice in that choir of need will quickly get drowned out amongst all the other competition and the like sounding. But each one of you have an organization that is unique and contributes to a community in a very special way and in interesting ways. And so we say, get away from needs-based fundraising, get towards value-based fundraising. Don't require the board to fully fill the gap. It was something I saw early in the pandemic, because there's so many organizations that had their boards, and they were coming up to the end of the fiscal year, and they were running out of time, and they needed the money, and they just hammered their boards for additional support because it was the shortest path, I suppose. We don't promote that, and so any board members on here, you're welcome. We don't promote that. While we think the board has a leadership role in it, we don't think they have a sole role in fundraising. Number 3, don't disappear. Again, whatever you're doing as an institution, keep doing it. Keep talking about it. Keep promoting it. Don't disappear. Make sure you're talking to your patrons, the community at large, and everyone in between. We say don't openly discuss bad news. And usually I qualify that by saying don't discuss bad news unless you have a solution and a pathway, or unless you have some good news to put around it. So just bad news on its own, openly discussing bad news without a pathway, can be really frightening to patrons. It can scare them off. And so we'll talk about being sort of purveyors of hope here in a minute, and you'll understand this is why. Don't be rigid with patrons. Just because someone gives every November and they give you $5,000 does not mean that they will give you $5,000 this November. They have their own things to deal with. You know this. I know by now everyone understands this. But the rigidity that comes with having an expectation set and not being flexible with that expectation can really, really do you in. I have a story that I'll quickly tell about that. Just today on another call, we had someone who they usually give $2,500 to this organization. They had usually done it by now. And so the development director reached out and had the conversation with them, but a very soft one about when would be the right time to come and talk with you. And this patron said, I'm 87, so you better hurry, which was kind of funny. But at the same time, he not only increased his annual gift, but then he also made a substantial six-figure endowment cash gift that he's going to deliver before the end of the year. So but the flexibility, the approach to him, and not just hammering him saying it's time to give, was actually a very soft way to get a little bit closer. He had already had plans to do this, obviously, but the approach made him feel even better about talking about it and then expediting it as well. And then last is making premature decisions about your organization. And by that, I mean saying, we're not going to be back until December of next year. Making that proclamation now, because when you make that proclamation, it sets certain expectations with your patrons. They may not be the expectations that you want to set. They may not be the responsible ones. And you might have to go back and change what that is a bit later. And we try to work really, really hard to never confuse our patrons. Even in times of uncertainty like this, don't confuse your patrons, because when you do, they tend to close their wallets and pocketbooks and become less enthusiastic about what you're doing. They'll tend to wait to see if and when you settle down as an institution before they think about coming back. So just be cautious about the proclamations you make about your institution publicly. Message and frequency matter. We say keep your messaging at a high altitude. So I say rather than 10 feet, keep it at 10,000 feet. Talk about it in that way. Talk about the portions of your institution that will change less. Your vision, your mission, your commitment to community. And so if you go deep, deep, deep on activities all the time, and those activities change and they change frequently, it goes right back to what I just said. They'll get confused. We don't want them confused. We want them to feel part of the team, part of the recovery. And so we need to make sure that they feel fully vested, fully understood. So focus on activities and value. So again, this goes back to needs versus value. Hopefully you're still doing activities, even if it's limited. Hopefully you're still producing some art and publicizing it in some way. In some way you're adding value to your community. Those are the things that we suggest that you talk about. Here's my comment about disappointment. So if you have disappointment, try as best you can to at least reinforce it with two positives. If it's only bad news that comes out, again, we have to balance that patron preservation. We can't just be about bad news right now. So think about how you're positioning your message, what you're talking about, how you're talking about it, the frequency at which, and then last but not least, the frequency of which, over communicate and make it interactive when possible. So a quick example there. Lots of organizations right now, are doing things on video, things on YouTube, things on Vimeo, all those which are terrific, but that's a one-way kind of communication. So what I've enjoyed seeing, and particularly in the last few weeks, are more social events online that surround performances or online galleries or anything like that you're doing, where it's much more interactive and patrons can actually talk. So it would be less like what I'm doing right now. It would be more like what Sarah did at the end of yesterday, where she had the group talk at Q&A session. And there's arguably much higher value for patrons in this scenario when it's more interactive for them. So here it is. We came up with our own PPP because it seemed very timely. We talk about the Patron Preservation Program. It's always a moment to be thinking about patron retention. It's both donor and audience or attendee, always thinking about how can we preserve our patron base. But especially now when you're in a low activity mode, and people tend to fill gaps, and we have plenty of gaps in the arts right now. We want to keep them engaged, and we want to keep them engaged so that when we gradually bring back our activity, they haven't already filled that gap with something else. So looking at how we can preserve those relationships, in particular your top relationships. Can you fundraise during a recovery? If I had a survey right now, I would hope everyone would say yes, 100%. It's certainly our belief that you can fundraise during a recovery. You have to change your tactics a little bit, be a little more donor focused, much more flexible than normal, probably more resourceful, a little more creative, but it doesn't mean you have to stop. In fact, you shouldn't stop. So the keys to this kind of preservation, we say when you're working with patrons, set these expectations, update them frequently, share the journey with them so weeks and months don't go by. And not only are they not wondering what you're doing, they've forgotten about you. And now you have to sort of re-engage them from ground zero. That's not really good. So keep updating them, engage them as possible, and avoid unpleasant surprises. Becoming transparent is really key. What I can say on this particularly is those organizations who set expectations and take these kind of steps, and then also those who are creating some level of performance or online art, the ones who are doing that really are now being more successful in their fundraising efforts. At first, it didn't matter. The first 3 or 4 months when everyone was just scrambling, I didn't see it make that big a difference, but I am seeing it make a difference now, that those who are producing and distributing whatever art form they're in whatever manner they can, are having better fundraising results. So I would say that, and you can see what that means in terms of patron preservation and communication then. So this donor cycle should look familiar to anyone who's ever been in fundraising. It's the way that we brand the different cycles of giving: identification and cultivation, solicitation, and appreciation. And then how do we talk about that donor? What if anything, to do with them next? So looking at that group, we're gonna spend a little time on cultivation and appreciation, which are sort of the same thing. Stewardship and appreciation go hand in hand. And then we'll talk about the solicitations also. And there we go. So critical though to the cycle, keep identifying donors, consistent attention to each one of those steps that we looked at. So again, even if you are in a low activity mode, it doesn't mean that you have to stop looking for new donors. In fact, there are people who become interested, because you can access more folks through your online offerings. You can actually generate new donors from that. Now, there'll be entry-level donors in almost every case, but if we believe that the cycle really is to get donors and keep donors and then eventually upgrade donors, the first step is imperative. We have to get them. If we don't get them, we can't keep them. If we can't keep them, we can't upgrade them. So that getting cycle is really, really important, of identification. But we still stay outwardly focused. We have full engagement with our patron base, whatever that means today. We'll focus less on what we need. We'll focus more on what we do and who we do it for. What's the impact, why it's important, what's the overall value to the community and to the people receiving it. So those are the kinds of things when we talk about outward focused and full engagement that we'd want you to keep paying attention to. Having a communication plan. I'm going to talk a little bit more about communication plan in a few minutes. So I'll bounce off that one for right now. Looking at mutually beneficial relationship, finding ways that the donor is not just entertained or appreciative, but is also engaged, and mentioned a couple of those earlier. But even private viewings or sending musicians into someone's home, if it's safe to do, I understand those are different in different areas. we work in a lot of different markets simultaneously throughout the country. And so we have to pay attention to what market we're in and adapt to that in terms of what we recommend specifically in terms of how do we entertain and educate and engage patrons, stewards, and steward the patrons rather. And so that, again, think about where you are, what you're able to do, and what you can get done in terms of just what's safe and what's accessible. The next one is this idea of emphasizing the cultivation and stewardship. Double down, overdo it. This is one of those that we say, if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing, especially now. Cultivating relationships that you want and stewarding relationships that you have. And that can be through all the vehicles that we just talked about just a second ago. Last but not least, customizing gift requests. Efficiency is not the key in terms of how many people can we ask tomorrow. This idea particularly, and you'll see it when we get into some of these breakdowns, that customizing gift requests really, really important at this point so that people know that you're thinking about them, being flexible, being approachable, have options, all the kinds of things that are sometimes when we're moving a little too quickly, we don't always see those. They don't always see those either. So let's talk about some different areas. Board giving is first. I'll talk about cultivation and stewardship sort of grouped together in these, and then we'll talk about solicitation. So board giving, of course, make it personal. I can't tell you, some of you here will do this, have done this. I can't tell you, though, how many organizations I've seen, because they convene board meetings, not right now in person, but they convene board meetings in person. And at the first board meeting of the fiscal year, they hand out envelopes and they say, here's your pledge form, fill it out and send it back in. It is my opinion, antithesis of relationship-based fundraising. It's like giving them a bill, whether it's filled out or not. These are the people closest to the organization. Why on earth, except for efficiency's sake, would we just hand them an envelope or a pledge form and ask them to complete it? So I'm big on making this ask personal. It is how we set the tone for fundraising for everyone else. We're going to regularly communicate and inform and involve these people, obviously, because they have fiduciary responsibilities, they have interests, they have usually a deep love for the institution, if we're doing our board recruitment in a strong way. We want to actively engage them with specific requests. So again, I promise this won't turn into Bob's pet peeves list, but this is a pet peeve. This idea that every board member is the same and we'll recruit the board members first and then we'll tell them what we'd like them to do. In this environment, particularly in this environment, different people have different talents and skill sets and interests, and we should cultivate those on our board. And so if a project comes up and we need a marketing person and a fundraising person and a PR person and whatever, that we know exactly who we're going to try to engage from our board to help specifically with that. It's a high leverage, high value sort of approach to board leadership. And it also increases satisfaction rates among board members. And it also equips them to then go out and do that with non-board members who we might want to recruit onto the board or volunteer or serve on a task force or any number of other things. I like to pair staff with artists. I like to pair board members with artists as well. And so all my relationships, we recommend at the top gift levels, whatever that means for you, we have two different relationships. We have usually a staff member and an artist, or a staff member and a board member, or a board member and an artist. But in any regard, the idea is if we're really focused on preserving the relationship, the idea that says we know somebody's going to leave someday in terms of artists, staff, and board members, we can't allow the relationships to go with them. So we don't want to lose the relationship just because we lost that person. And so that having two people own each top relationship is a good way to hedge your bets on that. So that's why we pair. The next to last one, ambassadors of confidence and hope. We want to equip board members to talk about key messages over and over and over again with whomever they're speaking about, whoever they're speaking with rather. So 3, maybe 4 messages they repeat over and over and over again right now. Confidently, this is where we're going as an organization. This is what we're doing next. These are our priorities. This is how we're going to impact the community. those are the kinds of messages you want to help work up. And of course, recognize good work and thank people. I mean, we're moving so quickly, and most days seem like bad days, even when they're good days. Just when somebody really comes out and does what you ask them to do on the board, thank them, because they've got their own issues to deal with as well. And to have them do anything for you, and particularly something successful and meaningful, deserves a pat on the back and a sincere, genuine thank you. Solicitation on this group. First of all, we're asking for their core giving. We need to make a goal. We might look at their totality of giving as we're thinking about what to ask each board member for. So if you have a special event that you can't have this year, or if you have performances or memberships or exhibits or anything like that that you normally have that you're not going to have this year, or maybe not at full strength, you might think about the total monetary value that board member gives you, and have that help set the course for what you're asking. I'm not necessarily promoting that you transfer all that money into their core board ask for a single year, but it certainly is a consideration to look at some of that while you're going to request, or perhaps request, an increased gift from a board member. Overall, it won't hurt them. It'll beef up the annual fund, and there's another purpose to it at the end, which is the next bullet point: creating a challenge grant. So one of the things that I really like to do, particularly right now in the industry, is to take the collective increases of board members and use it as a challenge grant for broad-based support, broad-based individual support. And so let's say collectively the board gives you another $10,000. That is really a wonderful way to promote a challenge grant to the broad base for new money, or for lapsed donors to come back, or whatever that scenario is. So it's the legitimacy of asking for an increased gift from a board member isn't just to see if we can get an increased gift. It actually helps propel giving from other areas moving forward as well. And we talked about making the ask personal, and I'll stand by that, because I think anybody who's going to be asked would really, at this level, would particularly like to be asked personally. So the next level, premier giving, and I'll let you, each one of you have different organizations, you have different budget sizes. So you decide while we're going through this, what you think your premier giving is for individuals. So this is non-board giving usually, and it's usually giving at, let's say, $1,000 or more. Sometimes it's $500 or more. For larger institutions, it might be $5,000 or more. So again, you define that, but whatever it is within your definition, please make the cultivation and the stewardship personal there too. So we don't treat all of our top donors the same, because they care about different things, and they attend different things or participate in different things, and they each have preferences about how close they'd like to be to the organization. So we're going to customize their stewardship. Secondly, we're going to continue to communicate regularly with them. We're going to express concern about not just our organization, but about what they're going through. If we've done our major gift fundraising right, we've got good relationships with these folks, and we know they care about us, and we care about them. And so again, don't make the communication just one way. We want to check in on them and their families and their businesses, and not just because it'll inform us about what to ask for, but because we really like them and we really care about them, and they're an important part of our donor family and our organization family. So continue to do that as well. We answer questions for these folks. We're always revealing for these folks. We also ask them for things as well, not just money. We ask them for advice. And I know the old saying as well as anybody else about if you want money, ask for advice. And if you want advice, ask for money. And it's really funny and all that. But I'm telling you, the ability, particularly from your donors, to continue to ask for their advice and then do something with it after you get it is wildly important for the long-term relationship. I tend to, even on some levels, if they really are close to the institution and if they want to give their advice, actively seek it out. You are dealing with some very, very big issues right now. They are dealing with big issues. They have different life experiences. There's nothing wrong with that. To come together and talk about what you might do as an institution, provided you're not, breaching confidence, organizational confidence, and so forth. We like to talk about demonstrating value through interaction. So that can be conversations, that can be producing art, some of the stewardship things that we talked about earlier. We definitely like to thank, engage, and share inspiration. Uh, uh, we've made it as much of a rule as we can. We hope every client does this. Most of them do. Thank every single donor. Even if you have to leave a message on their voicemail, thank every single donor usually within a week of the gift. And for some institutions, that's a big deal because they get a lot of donors. For other institutions, they can assign 1 or 2 board members to it and just knock it out every week or every other week. Whatever flows into when you normally get, high levels of donors, and you want to thank those folks. But personal outreach, personal thanking. Small group interactions is possible. I mentioned some of that. They can be online. Be nicer if they were in person. Sometimes they can be in person. And if they can't, someday they'll be in person. But I think we're to the stage of this now where most people understand that safety is first, care and concern is first. And so even if we can't get together the way that we would like to, there's still value in getting together. So again, the solicitation of this group will very closely mirror that of the board. The idea of saying, be thoughtful, be flexible. It's a changing environment. Your environment's changing on a daily, weekly basis still, and so is theirs. So be sensitive to that and be responsive to it. Not everyone can make an increased gift. And sometimes they can't make an increased gift now, but they could after the first of the year, or they could in March, or they could, whatever that looks like. So know going in that just because, again, you need the money doesn't mean that they can give you an increased gift. And it's okay to get a renewal gift right now with maybe the idea of, could we come back to you in a few months before we talk about next year and see how you're doing, how your situation is, if you'd like to make another gift, and if not, that's fine. But I always like to give that sort of pre-ask ask. It's an effective tool. It's good for relationships as well, to not just barrel in and make an ask every time you see them or talk to them or Zoom them. Personally ask, make it value-based, just like a board member. I know sometimes you have to send a letter. Sometimes it's because of geography, but for the most part, make it personal and make it value-based. We do like to tie it into specific operational needs right now. I know that there's a push right now over the last few years to get more and more project-based in terms of fundraising. And sometimes that's mistaken for seed money to do things that are way outside the budget, which puts a burden on the organization in most cases if it's not something in their strategic plan. But if it's something that you're already doing and it's operational, it's in the operational budget, and it's an activity that you're doing and someone would just like to be associated with it, I see absolutely no harm in that. I call it a directed gift instead of a restricted gift, just because they're directing at something that you're already committed to doing as an organization. And so that it's nice for recognition. It's nice to connect them to something like that. And you're going to do it anyway. So it's everybody wins in that particular case. Last but not least, this is the spot where heroic donors are. If you have 5 or 6 donors who might make a multi-year gift, and it's going to be of substance, and they're doing it because they understand that it's part of the recovery plan for your organization, this is where you'll usually find them. In the premier giving categories, very likely the board in some cases, depending on what kind of board you have. But this is the place to think about when you're being thoughtful about what the gift request might be. You might look at a few of them and think about terms of multi-year gifts. All right, regularly, and in terms of broad-based then, so these are your gifts below that amount. Whatever the amount was that you chose, these are the gifts below that amount. We say, again, regularly communicate, inform, appreciate, engage. It's different because it's more on a mass scale basis. This is more electronic. This is more about sending newsletters and annual reports and putting things on your website and then directing people to them. It's that kind of activity. Encouraging active participation in your offerings. So as much as you can, whatever it is that you're putting on the web or however you're putting your art out there, encourage active participation in what you're doing. People forget, and there's been a deluge of this stuff in the last 6 months where Some organizations, it's every day. And which I think is a little overboard. I said double down, but I didn't say quadruple down on stewardship. So the idea of saying, just keep encouraging them. So don't just tell them, don't just sell them on it, but really maybe a personal invitation, or having volunteers make calls out to this group saying, hey, don't forget we're doing this thing and we'd like you to be part of it, is really, really helpful. Again, it's about preserving the relationship. Refocus the donors from donor benefits to value-based, mission-based participation. A lot of organizations, particularly ours right now, cannot deliver on the benefits that they promise as part of giving. And so rather than retool all the benefits and try, for the next year or two, what we're saying is you can do some value-added things, but I wouldn't retool my whole benefits program. I just let people know we can't deliver these right now. And instead, here's what we're offering our patron base, whatever those 2 or 3, maybe smaller, maybe, less engaging on a normal day would look like, but still offering them something of substance and value that keeps them connected to your institution. Again, make it personal, thank one-on-one as much as possible, even at the broad base, even for $10 gifts. It's just a rule that we like to use. It's a good discipline to have. And again, you never know when someone's going to either think about drifting away and getting a thank you call keeps them on board, or an increased gift, or any number of things like that. So stay close to it. The actual solicitation, the asking of this broad-based group, continue to ask using the methods you can afford. If it's just direct mail, okay. Some of you can do telefunding, okay. And that is still a very viable way to reach out to people and to secure donations. Some of you will be more web-based, and you can only do a little bit. So do what's within your financial scope and with what's within your sort of resource scope in terms of people and technology. Don't overreach on this. Whatever you do it consistently and do it well. Next is to focus on high leverage, high return segments first. So if you have to make choices, this is not necessarily the place to start with cold calling or cold emails or cold mail, direct mail packages. Work with the people who have been generous to you first. We call it front loading. It's always fun to front load. It's do as much business as you possibly can in the first 2 fiscal quarters. And that way it leaves you room to both make some mistakes if people say no, and you have to find new money, and to do the tough work of acquisition that takes much longer and produces less per capita, but is still necessary. So we say, do that as much as you can. We do like to consider monthly gifts now. I wasn't a big fan of monthly gifts until about 3 or 4 years ago. We started doing it effectively, mostly through telefundraising. Direct mail, I haven't found to be nearly as effective with it, but telefundraising online on the webpage has been much more effective than direct mail has in this regard for most performing arts organizations, which is mostly what we work with. Utilizing challenge grants, giving days, etc. Don't let the pitch go by on any of that stuff. If you have access to a challenge grant or can create one, do it. If you have giving days, do it. Those are places to get people to both renew and to attract new donors. Again, move away from benefits-driven asks. I think we all know why now, because we can't always deliver on them. So some low-cost, efficient gift appeals. I know that this is going to be a question, so I thought about just listing them right here. If you don't have a Give Now button on your website, shame on you. And if you don't have a website, get a website and put a Give Now button on it. So please do that. The e-blasts also, any e-blast that you send out, any press release that you send out that you mail to your patron, anything along those lines, include some link or button or some way to take them back to your gift page so that they can make a gift. Again, I know it's passive, but we can't let opportunities go by right now because we're just not seeing our patrons as often as we normally do. Phone calls we talked about, point of contact or purchase. If you're not there yet, you'll be there, knock on wood, you'll be there soon. And so that pathway of purchase is also a good place, of course, to ask for support. Institutional giving. So boy, this is a tough one, mostly corporate giving. And it's not just about whether or not they can give, it's whether or not they will give. The optics right now are really, really tough because so many businesses are laying off staff. So you've got these businesses, big and small, who are furloughing their staff or who are reducing the size of their staff. And the optics of giving to an arts nonprofit can be really difficult for them to justify. So what they don't want to have happen is that in the business journal, it comes out that they laid off people, and then 3 days later, there's an ad in the newspaper that shows they're sponsoring an event at one of the arts organizations. That's bad optics for them. So they're being especially careful now. So what I say is, as much as you can, treat institutional donors like individual donors. Get your contact person. If this is a foundation, of course, do the same thing. Make sure you have a very good, very strong, very growing relationship with whoever your contact person is. Make sure that before you submit things, that it is in alignment with how they want it presented, the timing they want it presented, that you're following their advice. They are your emissary in this case. They're your ambassador in this case. And unless you're dealing with a really small business, you may not be talking to the decision maker. And so you need someone to represent you well. And so make sure that you're following their rules, whatever their rules are, and the rules are changing. And so that idea then of just submitting that proposal, having a follow-up conversation and seeing what happens, I hope those days are actually gone, and that we can build relationships a little more strongly with institutional donors. So you can see some of the things here that I've said, but I'll pull out a couple of, just for time's sake, pull out a couple of interesting ones. Communicate frequently, be flexible, solve the issues. If a foundation or a company is worried about the optics, concerned about the optics, changing their funding focus, that's fine. Talk about how you can adapt to that. Does it mean a new partnership for your institution? Does it mean a different way of approach? Does it mean more inclusion in a different way that you haven't had before? So these are creative. You're in a creative organization, so be creative is usually what I say. Think about what that is and communicate. Treat your funding partners as if they're really partners even before they're funding you. And if they are already funding you, then double down on stewardship with them, just like you would an individual. It's how you help them and they help you maneuver through the difficulties right now of sponsoring you and you providing benefit to them. And if somebody cancels or you have to cancel something, thank them anyway. Keep thanking them. Don't just move on because life is hard and you had to cancel something and now we got to think about the next big challenge. Please don't forget to appreciate them as you're moving forward. Their solicitation, again, agree on the approach and the focus prior to delivering a proposal or making whatever ask that you normally make. You might have to develop new sponsorable inventory because you're doing business differently or they're doing business differently, or they're concerned again about the optics of how their support may look to the general public. So be creative, be flexible. It can be done. Might take a little more time. Be adaptable to their processes and changing in timelines as well, and align that as closely as you can. Your priorities, align them as closely as you can with their priorities as well. So options for grantors, boy, this one, it's all case by case. If you're dealing with the grantors, especially that if keeping project related support is important to them, great. If some of them are willing to go to general operating support, great. If some of them are looking to create more partnerships, great. Just keep having the discussions so that you're not copying and pasting last year's application and sending it in and hoping that it turns out well for you. Make sure that handling program-specific, directed and restricted grants are taken into account. Many foundations particularly are either changing or expanding their purview of what it is they grant. And you should be really familiar with that, not just on paper, but through direct communication with them. So this is the big one. This is the slide that always gets a lot of attention and some ideas about how you can do this. But your recovery as an institution needs to match your community's recovery. And that's dictated by the local government, the health situation at the time, what other things are opening up or not opening up. So this idea of matching your community's recovery it'll make sense to your patrons if you do this. The idea that whatever it is, you want to maintain the goodwill of the patrons. You don't want to feel like a foreign object in amongst everything else that's going on. You want to be ready to ebb and flow with the changes, and we've all seen that there have been changes. It hasn't all been, pandemic, and now we're ramping back up. We've gone backwards a little. Now we're going forward and backwards. So be ready to go with those ebbs and flows. Stay focused though on the philanthropy. That's part of this matching with the recovery of your community, because generosity really is abound right now. I mean, I continue to be pleasantly surprised just by the acts of kindness and generosity, not just in terms of money, but just in terms of overall care and philanthropy that people and organizations have. So coming up on the end here, but looking at preparing a fundraising and stewardship plan, this is what we're suggesting for the next 12 months. 3 plans that work well together. Your fundraising and stewardship plan, much of which we just talked about through these different segmentations. A communications plan that works in cooperation with fundraising and stewardship. It's about being open and honest and involving. And a patron retention plan, that PPP plan. So fundraising and stewardship are activities. Your patron retention program is about how intentional and thoughtful you can afford to be to make sure that you maintain quality relationships with those patrons. So I'll go through these kind of quickly. You'll have these slides again, though, after this presentation. But fundraising and a stewardship plan, we focus on generosity. It is a constant. And thank goodness people and organizations continue to be generous right now. We message on value and goodwill. We don't message on need. We talk about what it is we're doing now and what we're going to do next and why we do it and why that's valuable to the community. Know your numbers, know your timelines, know your activities, have that for your operational plan, but also have it so that you have talking points for your fundraising and stewardship plans. Build momentum. High leverage, high return donors come first. We talked about that. Board, higher level renewing donors, broad-based donors, then acquisition and lapse donors. So doing it in terms of people who are closest to you first. And then we tie this plan with the patron retention also. So the fundraising plan, we front load leadership as much as you can into fiscal quarter 1 and fiscal quarter 2, which I think we're all slowly getting into fiscal quarter 2 if we're not there already. We curb the high cost, low yield asking until post-election and or December 31st, because there's plenty of noise out there right now, and we will not out noise the noise. So right now I'm saying anything that's going to be high cost or low yield, kind of hit the brakes on that. You've had plenty to focus on in terms of low cost, high yield, renewing donors and board members and potential sponsors, turn sponsors. Increase your communication activities. So as you're looking at bringing some of your offerings back, at least 8 weeks out, you start a communication program to get people resensitized to what it is you're doing, how they can participate, how they can be a part of it. Producing high value content and sharing it. We talked about several times. Do what you can on it and keep putting it out there. The communication plan focuses on the core messages. Again, that's who are you? What do you do? Why are you doing it? What's the value? Who do you do it for? Who benefits? And then the frequency of how you communicate those things out. Again, very frequently, but not overly frequently. And so some organizations sending stuff out every single day. I've gotten numb to it, and I imagine other folks have as well. Continue then relevancy and value. Relevancy and value is part of the communication plan because it aligns with the philanthropic plan. Last but not least, the patron retention plan, timely information, lots of engagement as much as you can in ways that are safe, in ways that you're able to do. Good news, forward motion, always sharing good news, always talking about where you are and where you're going to go, how the patron can come with you, and why this is important. Be transparent and be honest, because not everything's going to be a win. It's okay to talk about some challenges, but again, as much as you can, ensconce those in some positive things and some forward motion that you're making. So that is it now, and I'm happy to take some Q&A.
Looks like you've already got one in your chat.
Okay, I can't see that one.
Got it. So if you're your board, assess what you may not, that you may not endure through this time. So you may close permanently. How do you communicate that with current or even potential donors?
I'm assuming that it's because of finances. So let me go there. If it's not too late, and I don't know that it is, but if it's not too late, my first suggestion would be look at that donor list and talk about some of these potential heroic donors who could get you through. It doesn't. I don't care if it's a 3-month stretch, but a 12-month stretch would be better in terms of uh, the idea that if you approach them, they can't be the only piece in the puzzle. They're one piece in the puzzle. So if you approach them, if you identify them and you decide to approach them and ask them to do something heroic collectively in terms of money, they need to understand that they are one piece in a very thoughtful tactical plan in terms of recovery for your institution. And at the end of that recovery program, you may not be back at 100%. And I don't think you have to demonstrate being back at 100%, but I do think that you have to have some very determined goals set so that they know that it's not just a, kick the can down the road and hope we figure it out. So can you give us a lot of money to buy us some time? It's not a buy us some time commitment. It's a help us achieve the tactics and advancement that we'd like to achieve in the next 6 to 12 months. Other questions?
Everybody's gotten tired, which doesn't bode well for the last session of the day that comes next, but there you go.
I'm sure it is.
Here's one. Any thoughts on the long-term philanthropic shifts due to the pandemic?
Yeah, well, and I'm primarily optimistic, and so I'll tell you this story very quickly. When I started my business in 2006, and I left what was a very good job with the symphony here in Indianapolis, and I really enjoyed it. It was a great orchestra, great, but I just really wanted to do this. And about 4 months after I started, then all the terrible news hit. We had the downturn in real estate, the market crashed, everything bad happened, and I didn't know what to do exactly. So I chose to ignore it. It was the only answer I had at the time. And I told my clients, let's just ignore it and see what happens. And we all made more money. I mean, they were just killing it at the time. I'm not suggesting in this case necessarily that we just ignore it, but I think we're getting smarter because of it. I think I think donors and sponsors are finding their true affinity because of it. I think that they are realizing how important their investment is to things that are important in the community. It's because it's tactile now, whereas before it wasn't necessarily in every way. Um, and so I am actually very positive about what's going to happen coming out of this. I think there'll be more generosity. I think there'll be more investment not just in terms of money, but in terms of time and participation. I actually think if we do this well, it will breed new board members for us. But we have to be intentional about it and seize the opportunity. So I'm usually one to say take a negative and flip it, and let's try to find the advantage within that. And usually there is one. And I think we can come out of this stronger in terms of organizational missions. I think we'll come out of it being higher values to our communities. I think we'll have more interesting programs. I think we'll be more diverse. I think we'll certainly have more engaged board members who come out of this feeling better and stronger than when they went into it. So I'm encouraged by it.
It looks like you've got a couple more questions and short on time. So do you want to talk about successful things you're seeing out there? your top piece of advice for a very small board, or language to move from one time to monthly or yearly. You pick.
Okay, I always pick the middle. It's the reason I always buy double cheeseburgers at Wendy's. It's always in the middle. Um, so, that was the small boards.
Yep.
Yeah, focus, laser focus. So, what I don't believe, I'm not a believer that every board member is a practitioner in fundraising, or should be, because while as a consultant that's fun to watch from a distance, sometimes it's not always the most productive thing. But I do believe that every board member can be involved in the process of fundraising, even if they're not included in the act of fundraising. And so I usually take, no matter the size of the board, I'll take a small group of people and say, your job is to help ask for support. That's your job. Do you agree? Yes, great, let's go. The rest of the board, they're the ones who are dedicated to the cultivation of relationships, and right now, particularly the stewardship of relationships. So the board at large, however large or not that it is, their job is to steward and retain. Our PPP program, the bulk of the board, that's what they're involved with. Keep relationships, keep them strong, keep them deep. And then we have the smaller group of board members and usually staff members that are direct askers, they're frontline askers. And so that way everyone, we're letting everyone lean into their strengths. We're not making anyone do what they didn't sign on to do, hopefully. And the byproduct is that it brings patrons closer to the institution. So that's a quick answer.
It's a lovely answer. And I picked on you yesterday saying that you and I might disagree on the role of boards and fundraising, and it turns out we don't. So.
There it is. Yeah, right. Great.
We can't applaud in the way we normally would, but everybody, in whatever way, whether it's raising your hand or sending a chat or turning on your camera and giving the thank you. Thank you so much, Bob. It's been lovely to listen to you for the last hour. And thank you everyone else for participating and sending in your comments and questions, and being part of this great experiment the last 2 days. So
thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.